So good morning, and it's really a pleasure to start this first panel of discussion. Okay, this first panel is entitled "Computer Science for All: Scientific Community Perspectives." So we have started with Simon Petty-Jones, okay, as the founder and chair of computing at school in UK. But now it's also important to have here Simon Humphreys, which was the general coordinator of computing at school for almost 10 years, and Tim Bell from New Zealand, that is the founder of another tremendous initiative. It's called Computer Science Unplugged. And I have here with me, okay, on the stage, I have Professor Nuno, okay, a co-founder of ENSICO, and a professor at the University of Minho, and also a researcher at INESC. And I have here with me Ademar Aguiar, that is also a board member of ENSICO, and he's also associate professor of the Department of Informatics Engineering. So thank you all, and I will start with a few questions to all of you. You'll have approximately 6 minutes to answer, okay, because we have a short period of time for each panel of discussion. But I will start with you, Simon, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
Okay, so as co-founder and general coordinator for almost 10 years of the Computing at School initiative, can you share with us how do you think we should train teachers and primary educators to prepare them to teach computing? Can we do that involving current math and ICT teachers, or should we prepare a new generation of teachers? That's the first question, Simon.
And such a big question, too. I mean, you've heard the experience from Simon Petty-Jones about part of our journey in England, and I suppose my role, because my background was very much as a classroom teacher. I had kind of two worlds in my teaching career, because I started teaching as a music teacher, and a hearing impairment forced me to change careers, and so my life has been spent very much focused in the classroom. And the emphasis that I wanted to bring to computing at school as it was starting was really the emphasis that Simon brought out in one of his sort of final slides, the fourth one, I think, about loving the teachers. Beautifully put. I mean, whatever education, whatever jurisdiction we are living in, whichever way our educational system has been organized and has been structured, the process of a teacher in front of a group of children remains the same in whichever country we happen to be. And if we haven't got the teachers with us in whatever transformation, whatever change, whatever new initiative we are developing, then it will fail. And principally, we want to try to bring some measure of confidence to those teachers, confidence in the subject material, confidence in the pedagogy, confidence in using any of the new equipment, any of the new ideas. If they don't feel as if they have that confidence, if they feel as if, partway through the lesson it's going to fall flat, or they're going to get an awkward question from some of their students, and they feel on kind of shaky territory, then the whole it feels as if the whole reputation may suffer, and so they'll tend then to kind of move to something which is safe, something which they are familiar with, and something which is less new, and for them feeling less challenging. And so the need to ensure that we've got the teachers on board and that they feel confident, for me was very much the starting point for CAS. And as Simon demonstrated, we really wanted to get the teachers talking to each other, get the teachers sharing their knowledge, sharing their experience, sharing their war stories with each other. Teachers, there's always this kind of credibility issue. We do need the researchers, we do need the academics, we do need the industry professionals here to support us in our collective endeavours to transform our society and to transform the hearts and minds of our young people. But when that door closes in our classroom, it's just us. And so putting that front and center is really important. Now, coming back to your question, could we be using maths teachers? Should we be training up a whole brand new cohort? Probably both is the answer. We had a cohort of teachers who were familiar with the ICT curriculum, the Information Communications Technology curriculum. Many of those teachers were non-specialists in anything to do with computing. They had moved from other subjects, to business studies, from geography, from PE, and found their way to gain kind of career enhancement and promotion through taking on the subject of ICT with which they had a particular interest, and many were doing, an outstanding job. I think the idea that you're developing there in Portugal of working with the maths teachers, where, as Simon has said, there is an inevitable, correlation and perhaps symbiosis too, is certainly a good thing, because the kind of conceptually you're going to find a lot of common ground. But then if we are to be establishing a brand new subject in our school curriculum, and we have teachers who will then self-identify as computing teachers, as teachers of computer science, in the same way that I, as a musician, identified as a teacher of music with a specialist degree behind me and specialist teacher training behind me as well to help, then we also need to be advancing that on that level as well. So perhaps working with existing teachers that you have is seen as a short to medium term solution. But as the subject becomes more established in the curriculum, parents and head teachers and principals of schools and policy advisors, recognise we have a need to be starting recruiting teachers of computer science. Then I think we need to be developing that in our university teaching education establishments as well.
Okay, thank you, Simon. It was an excellent starting point for our discussion. So, team, now I would like to ask you also one thing. The Computer Science Unplugged initiative stands that computer science should be taught without a computer. Why do you think that we should do that instead of putting children using computers very early and teach them how to program a computer or how to play with Scratch? And based on your experience, when should we do the shift from the unplugged to the plugged approach, including programming hands-on session?
Okay, well, there's a lot to unpack in that. First of all, I just really want to clarify that the idea of the unplugged approach is one of many tools for teaching computer science. It turns out to be quite popular and quite useful, but I would never advocate that students only use unplugged. So it's an ends to a means, and I'm really enjoying what both Simons have shared, actually, and in particular the idea that there's something special about programming. It permeates what computer science can do. It's not what it's all about, but it's a key part of it. And in fact, one of my colleagues who was very involved in the beginning of Unplugged, Mike Fellows, has often described computer science as the rock and roll of mathematics. Simon described it as maths made incarnate, and I think it is that there is a very close connection. But if you do computer science ideas without actually implementing them, without programming them, then you're either doing maths or maybe social studies, because computer science isn't all mathematical. It also involves getting requirements from users, designing interfaces that match the way that people think and act and so on. So, it's not entirely about maths. And that is one reason that it doesn't completely fit in a maths curriculum, but it certainly has a huge amount in common. So with Computer Science Unplugged, best done in conjunction with programming, and there's a lot of evidence that it's a really good catalyst for programming. I think when students just get on a computer and they think they have to learn to program, then it can become a bit of a copy and paste or guess what the teacher wants sort of exercise. But Unplugged gets students off the computer, it gets them working in a social setting, in a kinesthetic way, and it gets them thinking about ideas which they can then implement or see being implemented on a computer. So there's a very close relationship there. Unplugged on its own is, well, kind of mathematics or interesting puzzles or something like that. Programming on its own it's useful, but the two together seem to really catalyse. And in fact, there's a paper that came out a few years ago where Humans and Aviligo did an experiment. They had two groups of students. One group had 8 weeks doing nothing but learning programming, and another group had 4 weeks doing nothing but Unplugged, and then 4 weeks programming. So both groups had 8 weeks, but one only spent half as much time on programming. The question is, which group was better at programming? And you'd probably know it's a trick question. The answer is there was no difference. They were equally good at programming. But the group that had done Unplugged as well had higher self-efficacy. And I think that actually is a really important thing to think about when we're looking at curriculum. And Simon Peyton-Jones hinted this quite a bit too, is that we're not necessarily trying to make people into programmers, but we want to build their self-efficacy. And that example of the student mysteriously called M is just a wonderful example of that, where that person had built huge self-efficacy because of that experience that they had. So I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind. And I guess the other thing is that, you mentioned the Scratch programming language, and I think one of the really important things that we want teachers to be aware of is that they're not teaching Scratch or playing with Scratch. Sure, they kind of are, but that they're teaching programming using Scratch as a tool to do that. And that's something that I really want to emphasize too, is that it's not, take the emphasis a wee bit away from the tools and think about what we're really trying to achieve. So, not just programming skill, not just preparing for a career, but some sort of self-efficacy and an ability to understand the digital world that we live in. Everything's digital that, students are going to be involved in some way. And also tools to support other subjects. In the same way, maths is a tool that supports, it's hard to do science if you have zero maths. And in the same way, computer science could really help there. It was simulation. And again, the dartboard was a great example of a simulation. But, what about simulating movements, things like that, or even automating measurement and so on. So it's got a lot to offer other subjects in the same way that literacy, numeracy does. In terms of what age, I think that there's a key point around about 12 or 13 years old, adolescence, where students start to make up their mind about careers and stereotypes and directions. And so I think if you can get students developing that self-efficacy before adolescence, then that's really key. And I do notice that things like, gender isn't such a big deal for a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old. Once they turn about 13 or 14, the girls are wondering if they really want to be seen doing programming. But if they've had positive experiences with that before that time, then it can make a big difference. That's not the only thing. It's easier to learn new ideas when you're younger and so on too. And also you've got fewer distractions in your life and that sort of thing. So really in terms of learning, sure, for very young students, in New Zealand at least, we tend to stick to more Unplugged. And I don't mean just things off the Unplugged site, but not getting onto computers in a hurry. And some of that is just being good at maths, good at literacy and so on, which is already in the curriculum. But, around about 8 to 10 years old, it varies a lot between schools and children and classes. They would start working with actual programmable devices, programming languages, and then by around about the 14-year-old age group, the curriculum here in New Zealand says that they will have had the full experience of programming. But I'm finding that it's really around about 11, 12-year-olds that really eat it up, and then by the time they're turning 13, 14, they're starting to get very focused on what they really want to do. So, I think that's what I wanted to say. I really also just want to emphasise what Simon Humphreys said, that the teachers are absolutely crucial. Look after your teachers, love your teachers. Don't underestimate how much resource, how much time, how much money needs to be put into upskilling them. Because if you're trying to change students' attitudes, the teacher has to have a good attitude. If they have been forced to do computer science and they're not enjoying it and they just have to do it, it's probably going to undermine the whole point of getting students interested in it. And that also includes, which perhaps we haven't mentioned yet, is initial teacher education, where teachers, the young students themselves are becoming teachers. And that's even a more challenging place to make change. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. So I will now pass to José Nuno. And I would like to ask you the following. Okay, so at INSICO, you have always been inspired by computing at school in UK, and also by Tim Bell and Computer Science Unplugged. And you strongly believe that computer science should be taught, linked to, and in parallel with what students are learning in both math and Portuguese disciplines. Why do you think that those links are mandatory for computer science? And how do you think primary educators and math teachers should be motivated to link computer science to what they are teaching?
Well, we knew a lot about computer science unplugged already, as I told Tim, for a long time. My research area points towards being slow in reaching a computer to solve a problem. You first need to think about the subject. And if we go very early in our evolution, babies are born unplugged for the time being. So through their very slow evolution, the most important competence that they obtain, they reach, is articulated speech. That's the real advantage that somebody who studies, who is educated, because people are able to express their thoughts and influence other people through reading and writing. For specific problems, you can actually compress the language. It's not much taught or considered, but it's a fascinating story how maths notation evolved from natural language through compression. Very much like when people use a mobile phone and start compressing the language with abbreviations and all that. So if you look at how it was referred today that already that maths notation is difficult, is cryptic, but that was the intention. The intention was that you should be able to write something really fast. Okay, so Latin became more and more compressed until it reached the symbolic stage that we use today. When you are talking to somebody, a human being is as smart as you are, so he or she is able to have intuitions and understand metaphors and all these things that belong to the linguistic domain. But when you need to talk to a computer, the computer can never perceive the real world. It just doesn't fit there. There's not enough memory to put the whole reality inside of it. And it's not desirable, as Simon has already said. That's not desirable because many details of the problem have to be ignored. And the language that we have to capture reality, the abstractions of reality, is maths. You cannot run away from it. It's just the language that all sciences use to transmit knowledge in a reliable way from generations to generations. So that's why computational thinking is this very nice blending of natural language, where you normally express yourself, and mathematical language, where you express you express abstractions. In my teaching, not at INSICO, but as we have already told many times, we are learning a lot when we are writing the contents for the classes in INSICO. It's a real challenging thing because there is one responsibility. You cannot spoil the brain of these so bright and so creative children. It would be a disaster if what we do now in this way would cut their imagination and that kind of thing. But in my teaching, I teach programming and methodologies to enable students to write good problems. We can already feel that the short command or the lack of command of natural language is becoming a very big problem. People may be able to write a program very fast, but they don't understand the requirements. You write some piece of text and say, this is the problem you have to solve. and they look at you and say, what should I do? They don't even have the patience to read the text. One day I was driving to the university and I was going to prepare an exam, and I said, interesting. I could have this little story before asking the students to write the algorithm. When I presented this little story to the assistants, we were preparing the exam, they said, take the little story out. They don't have time. They look at it's too much text. They're going to fail in that question. And that was the interesting part, connecting the algorithm with a real situation. So I think when we write codes, we are sending short messages to the computer. And a good exercise that we normally do is when you look at a piece of text and say, what really matters in this text? This is already computational thinking. What really matters? Underline the nouns. Underline with a different color the verbs. Some of the nouns are noise. Some others are just grammar connectors. But others are the real thing. They are the entities that you should address. Some verbs are not important. Some others are the actions, are the algorithms that you're going to write. So in that sense, there is a very strong connection. And we could actually talk about this for a long time, okay? For instance, what makes building an algorithm difficult is because the requirements have superlatives. This is a grammar concept. So you say, give me the largest list such that. What makes writing the algorithm difficult is the largest, is a superlative, is a limit point. Beyond that, the result is wrong. Before that, it's too general. So these are competencies that you need to have that come from natural language, and computational thinking is just making these things precise. As Simon said, precision is really what matters when you, because the computer doesn't have intuitions, okay? It's able to make something really fast and very well, but something really wrong when it just loses track of so it has no recovery mechanism, at least for the moment. So that's why I put natural language. It's not Portuguese. It's Portuguese because they're in Portugal. Natural language as a competence that if we ignore that competence, we may have problems in the future, but you may have people who are very good at writing code, but they don't understand written text, and they fail.
Thank you. And now, Ademar, as both a pragmatic software engineer and as a professor of software engineering at FEUP, what do you think that will be the impact of a K-12 computing discipline at university level? What will you teach to your students, knowing that all of them will have 12 years of computer science background when they go to software engineering or computer science university courses?
Okay, thank you. I was thinking how is the short answer to this question, because it will be a long list of things, because it's very pragmatic. So, but I would be happy. So as a professor in informatics engineering, I'll be really happy to receive students, which usually they are really good, at least in this place. I think almost everywhere, but in this place. But so I will be really happy, and but it's sometimes it's a nightmare, especially in first year, because they discovered informatics engineering, or they like to be professionals, informatics engineer, in 3 years now or 5 years with a master's, but they are just starting. So they had different ideas before, like medical school, but I'm not able to go there, so I go to another course and so on. So for different reasons, some of them arrive here from scratch. Okay, no programming, no concepts, no way of thinking, almost nothing, which is good. Of course, if they arrive here, they know how to think. They already practice many processes, mind processes that allow them to be really fast in the pace, but some of them struggle. So I'll be very happy, and in order to step back a little, I'll be as happy as a professor that receives a student that probably wants to be a professional in communication, but that student on that first year doesn't know how to read or to write. Maybe he knows how to think in their way, but not precisely a text, a piece of text, for example. So there are many things that if we teach 12 years of these concepts before, they will arrive here in our course, of course, much better prepared, because I think that I like to see software as a media. So through software today, we spread our knowledge, our expertise to all our users, to the world. And actually today we are putting software, because software sometimes is dangerous, can be hacked. We put software, that knowledge in software and software in silico. So it becomes harder to hack. Not impossible, become harder. So having these students with all these 12 years of awareness of many things, they will be much better prepared to be a professional on that area. I don't believe that all of people that will study 12 years of have this computing knowledge, they will become professionals, as I'm not a professional on writing movies, on sports teacher, all the other professions. But why to start from scratch in the first year of university? I think it's a waste. And when you look at the world really needs more and more of that. And the pace of need, the increase of the need is really high. It's much higher than we can afford in the school system. So we must do something really, really fast. So I'm optimist, that's why probably we are all here. But at the end, I will be able to teach, so not start from scratch, not compress so much what we do. For example, the course of software engineering, one I'm teaching more, I compress in 2 hours the history of software engineering. Basically, what's the definition of that? In which year it appeared? 69. So it was not 2,000 years ago. So it was 69. So the parents probably are, I hope they are alive. So it was very recently, but I need to compress in 2 hours a little of software engineering to give them background so that they can understand other concepts, so that they can think in a different way, so they can collaborate with other people. Because writing software, writing code can start as an individual activity, but actually is not today. Because of the scale of our systems, yeah, you can be the best programmer in the world, but if you cannot join a team, if you cannot communicate through codes and through verbal words, it will be hard. So shortly, what should I teach? I would be able basically to teach much more, go to more the fundamentals, go to the history, like all other courses do. We start history of arts, history of this, history of that, and now the history of software engineering is 2 hours in my course, okay? Right. And they say, well, why we are learning this? But they understand the bugs and those kind of things. So I'll be able to teach more concepts. I'll be able to go deeper in many concepts. I'll be able to provide them more techniques. I will be able to teach them things that didn't work in the past and things that experts do. So I'll be able to teach at the end of the course. Of course, they must be ready to deliver solutions, very complex solutions. So I need to teach as well tools, technologies that are in the market. So of course, so basically it's for me to be able to not waste so much time starting from scratch, right, but having the basis there. Because I also believe that with those 12 years, in the first year of the university, the students will be in a level of expertise that they don't know what they know. So they practice. When you ride a bike the first time, you pay attention to many details. When you know how to ride a bike, you simply do it. okay? And you improve other things. So it will be like teaching students. Actually, I don't teach, I force them to learn. So allow students to learn how to ride a bike, if they like to ride a bike, with a lot of fun, and to explore, to think more. So there are many ways of doing this, of course. And another dimension is that today we still are probably, when I say we all that teach these areas, probably we are focusing on some ways of programming systems, but there are new ways appearing. There are some ways that are already there that combine thinking more or exploring more. Depends on the project, depends on situation, depends on the mood of the team, and so on and so on. So I don't know if I answered the question, but basically, yeah, I'll be very happy as a professor of any other area. Will be happy to have students with 12 years of background instead of 0, which happens in some cases. By the way, I was one of them, okay? So when I started here, I had 0 years of programming. That's it.
Thank you, Ademar. So Simon, I will be back to you right now. Okay, so when you look at your intentions at the beginning of your journey in 2013-14, I believe, and the results achieved until now, what are the biggest challenges, these kind of initiatives? So I'm talking, of course, about implementing a computing discipline in the K-12 curriculum. What are the biggest challenges that this kind of initiatives deals with, in your view, after all these years?
Yeah, no, thank you. I was just inspired there. Excuse me. I'm thinking of Ademar's points, and I just want to comment on that a little bit. First, if I may, the analogy I always draw is, when I started doing my music degree straight after school, I wasn't taught how to read music, and I wasn't taught how to play the piano or any other instrument. Those were givens. It was assumed that I was arriving for that further study with quite a bit of background knowledge, experience, both practical and also theoretical. And so what that meant was, of course, that when we were starting out our music studies at degree level, we'd have lessons in keyboard harmony, so they would put a sort of Mozart string quartet on the piano stand for us, and then we'd have to work out how to read the 4 clefs and produce that string quartet on the piano. Quite an advanced skill, but it was just assumed that, you can read music and you can play the piano. So now what I've got to teach you is how to read 4 staves with a viola clef in there as well. And now they've moved on to being able to do symphonies. So having students who've got some kind of background knowledge is always going to be a good thing, I think, because you can then really take them into some quite interesting stuff. And coming back to your point, yes. Challenge. We haven't arrived there yet. I mean, we've been saying, several times so far this morning, making a change in education takes a long time. So this isn't going to happen in 1 year. It's not going to happen in 5 years. It probably won't happen in 25 years. You really have to have that picture of where do we want to be? By the time the next generation are coming up running ENSICO and the next generation of teachers are coming through, where do we actually want? You picture that 8-year-old child at the moment going through the education system. They will then become the teachers of the future. What are they going to be doing in 20 years' time? It's having that long-term vision, has to be there. The things that, Simon Peyton-Jones alluded a little bit to some of the things we didn't get right, or haven't yet got right. The one sort of group of people that I think we have never really been able to get much traction with have been the head teachers and the principals of the schools, and that they need to come with us. They need to recognize and understand the needs. Now, I don't know what it's like in Portugal, but the majority, and I have no stats to back this up, this is very much a kind of a gut feeling, but that the majority of head teachers and principals of our colleges tend to come more from a humanities background than a science background, and therefore don't fully grasp the nature of some of the issues that we are talking about. But they also act very much as the gatekeepers for the way in which the curriculum, how that curriculum that they have to deliver across all the 12, 13 subjects gets carved up, how much time gets allocated, how much support they're prepared to put into place for their teachers in terms of their ongoing professional development. And of course, they have significant competing demands. Somebody once sort of jokingly said to me that here, our Ministry of Education, our Department for Education, it's a little bit like the skip of politics. I don't know if you have the term skip in Portugal, but basically a skip is a huge container into which you chuck all the stuff that you don't quite know what to do with, or you want to get rid of. And so in education, it's a little bit like this skip. We don't quite know what to do with our social problems, so we're going to chuck it into the skip of the Ministry of Education. You know, and so heads have got all these competing demands, dealing with many social challenges, many behavioural challenges, and really the notion of trying to, you know, replace, implant, reorganize the ways in which we teach particular subjects. It's a small part of their overall commitment, but they need to be with us in that in this collective drive to bring about change. The other thing was that the exam regimes in each country drive the way in which that curriculum gets carved up. And so having meaningful qualifications at the various points that those qualifications are put into place. For us, we have sort of some pinch points in our kind of secondary education, our 11 to 18 education. The pinch points would be when a child is aged 14 and they decide that they don't want to take on any further study of computer science, because then that's when our kind of first stage of our formal examination process begins. And it's always an interesting question, I think, to pose. What understanding of our digital world do we want that 14-year-old who undertakes no further study in computing or computer science, informatics? What computational model do we want them to have in their heads at that age of 14? Because it's then going to be another 5-6 years before they enter the workplace. So going back to the quote of Richard Riley, right at the very top of our conference, you know, their world is going to look significantly different to how it looks when they're aged 14. But what do we want to have them? What is that computational model we want them to have in their heads? We've then got the pinch point of age 16, our first formal qualifications, as a kind of a generalist understanding of their digital world, a bit more specialist than the 14. And then, of course, there's the 18 just before they go on to university. These moments, what do we want our students to know? What do we want our students to understand? And getting that qualification regime in place and understood, and collectively understood, not just by our closed community, but the wider community, and certainly involving parents and others in that, is also going to be important. The big challenge that we certainly faced 2013-14 was all to do with scale. And that just getting a few teachers to have a nice, cozy chat with each other about what they're doing through our sort of hub network was never going to reach all the kind of 4,000 plus teachers in secondary education that we needed to reach, let alone the 20 plus thousand kind of primary school teachers who themselves don't kind of self-identify as computing teachers. How do we get them to understand and to imbue their curriculum with some of these concepts? So scale is always going to be problematic. And going back to my sort of first point I made here about the length of time it takes. Those involved in ministries of education, our policy advisors, their priorities change. And whichever political flavour is in charge at any one moment will inevitably change, and it moves from one side to the other and back. And you know, it's hard to remain some level of constancy. So keeping up the advocacy agenda about why this is important, at all stages. As you get kind of lost in the nuts and bolts of training the teachers and meeting targets and dealing with resources. Don't forget to keep maintaining that high level conversation with those policy advisors, because they change so often. But keep the advocacy going, because it is really important that we keep the arguments in the forefront as each political generation begins to change.
Sure.
I hope that's gone some way to answering that question.
Yeah. Thank you, Simon. Thank you very much for sharing your experience. Okay, so Tim, now I would like to ask you also the following. So based on your experience as well with schools of New Zealand, do you think that unplugged computer science can in fact be taught by whole teacher, or it is mandatory to involve ICT teachers or teachers from some specific discipline like math?
Right, thank you. So in terms of teaching, I think it varies a lot from junior school to senior high schools. And in junior school, as with every subject, teachers tend to be generalists, the same, and I'm guessing that it's the same in Portugal, that for a beginning student, the same teacher might be teaching the mathematics and the natural, language and science and music and whatever, which can be an issue because they need to be well trained in how to teach that. But as you go further up, the teachers will specialise more and more into high school and where there are exams and things like that. There really needs to be a lot of knowledge about where you're taking things. Unplugged is only ever a gateway. It's not the curriculum, it's not the whole subject or anything like that, but it's a good way to get people involved. But just got to keep emphasising that programming is a big part of it. And Simon, I was really interested. Your point about music is a really good one. I try to imagine a world. Suppose playing music was not allowed for kids. Never seen a piano, never seen a guitar. Maybe they'd heard some music in the background on movies, and maybe they'd heard some music on the radio. And they arrive at university. Imagine Simon arriving at university going, I'm not quite sure what music is or how you make it, but it did kind of seem interesting. Would you have taken it? And that's exactly the situation a lot of jurisdictions have for computer science. I've seen a few Hollywood movies about what computer scientists are like. I think they're pretty, there's a stereotype of what gender they should be and what kind of social skills they should have and things like that. And unfortunately, they're often exactly the wrong things, and exactly the wrong people might be attracted to it. And, one of the things I like to keep on emphasizing, particularly to teachers who have a lot of influence on their students, is that we don't write computer programs for computers. We write the programs for people. And that actually resonates with a lot of teachers who may not see themselves as ICT teachers or computer experts, because many teachers and many people in general have had bad experiences with computers. And then they realize maybe it's not their fault, but the person who wrote the computer programs was writing them for the computer and not for the person who's going to use it. And then you start to think about it, and the students start to think about it, and maybe, a teenager thinking about a career is thinking, actually, I don't really like the way computers are going, or I've got ideas for how to do them really well. I'm really interested in helping people, but I do need to learn the skill of programming, and that's not too bad in order to make this happen. So I guess a lot of it is to help teachers see things from that point of view too, and just to help students know what they're getting themselves into. So in terms of, Unplugged, one of the really good things that we've found with it is that teachers are often very scared. They're told you will have to teach computational thinking or computing or programming or something. And they'll shut down and go, look, I did not sign up for this. I've been in the game for 30 years maybe. I'm going to retire soon. Can I get away without doing it? But with Unplugged, because it uses familiar things, often they're starting to work with ideas that they might have never thought they would understand, starting to use what they would consider jargon as everyday words and so on. And then perhaps, very much, that's a great way to get teachers into it, and also to some extent students. The big risk with Unplugged is that teachers stop there and they go, okay, I know 5 different Unplugged activities. They're really clever, they're really fun, the kids enjoy them. I will do them. I'm not quite sure what the point of them is, but we've done the activity and I can tick the box that I have taught computer science and carry on. And unfortunately, that robs the students of the opportunity to then put wheels on it, to make it incarnate, as Simon Peyton-Jones says, to program it, to make things happen. And so in actual fact, I think there's actually also a real risk with too much emphasis on Unplugged if teachers in particular think that that's enough. So yeah, that's something to watch out for. Again, to answer your question a bit more directly, for primary school teachers, it's a really good way to get them involved, but don't stop at that point. Make sure that they get engaged with programming, and the two can be integrated really well as a gateway just to build their confidence, learn jargon. So, a lot of the Unplugged activities are not so much about knowing a particular algorithm, but using jargon in the process. So jargon, when I say jargon, things like debugging, maybe terms like data representation or data or binary numbers, and things like that teachers wouldn't normally use in everyday language. So it's just a chance to exercise those things. I want just one other point that I really want to pick up on what Jose said. I think it was that the link with literacy is a big deal. Choosing a variable name is a real act of literacy. You think of 2 or 3 words to describe what this variable contains. If you can do that, you have written a really clear program, but you've also clarified in your mind what that variable is doing. And I think a lot of the stereotypical students who might be good at programming would be happy to call a variable J or P or something, rather than some 3-word description that is much more meaningful. So huge overlaps, and I think teachers will pick up on that as well. Teachers often are very passionate about literacy or numeracy, and if they realise that this computation thing is actually using it and reinforcing it and requiring it, which again Jose really emphasised, I think that's another way to teachers' hearts as well.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. And now Jose, Nuno again. This is a big one. Okay, but one of the key aspects of you are testing in the K-12 computer science program you are developing is related with 3 specific pedagogical stages. Mainly computer science Unplugged in the first 3 to 4 years. So what we have is the first cycle here in Portugal. Then on the second cycle, classes included guided hands-on session using Excel, Jupyter, and a functional programming like Haskell. And finally, on the third cycle classes with full hands-on session with Jupyter, in integrated development environments, and a functional programming language like Haskell again. Why do you think that these 3 stages are important for students? And what should be the teacher profile to address computing classes on these different stages?
As you know, at ENSICO we have been very experimental. We decided to do things bottom up and learn from experience. But in retrospect, I think what we have been doing is reinventing something which has been known for quite a long time. It's the Suzuki method for teaching or learning, which started with the music, actually violin study, and they proceed exactly in the same way. Start very early, and don't give the instrument to the student straight away. Hide the instrument. Make the student long for the instrument and start telling stories, listen to music, discuss about music. And slowly you get closer to the instrument. The instrument here is the computer, okay? And we need to be very careful about how we approach the instrument. Why? Approaching the instrument has 2 sides. What kind of paradigm are we going to start from? And we are in the age of parallel computing. and concurrent computing. So when we look at the marvels of Google, search and all these things, they're parallel. So it would be a disaster to start teaching kids from very early to think sequentially. So a sequential language is not a good start, in my opinion. So it's like you need to go to the moon and you give a car. Okay, you know you have a car, but what you need is to go to the moon, and you cannot go by car to the moon. The other thing which is needed, so this explains the first part. The first part is basically games and all that. They actually learn far better what an algorithm is if they play it, if they dance it. Okay? If they are either the data or they are the processes that process the data. In the classroom, dividing the classroom in parts, you do this at the same time. So they are running the algorithm in the classroom at the same time, and instead of writing, for instance, a scratch script which is sequential. So we have to be very careful about this, because we may spoil their brain from very early. Okay. The other thing is that it needs to be interpretive. There is an analogy with music again, which is writing a program is like making a song to happen. What I'm going to make the parallels. A song is the program. Somebody has to write it. A composer writes the song. The programmer writes the song. Writes the program. It has to choose a style. Is it going to be pop music or classical music or hip hop or whatever? That's the choice of the programming paradigm. Then you need an interpreter. I mean, the only way the music happens is because somebody picks an instrument or sings the music. You need somebody to interpret the music. And eventually you need to use physical resources to do that, which is the instruments and the voice. So that's the computer. So inside all this, a key thing is the interpreter. And so this is a bit technical, but languages are compiled are useless in this respect. The interpreter they are going to use in the classroom in the second and third stage, it needs to be an extension of the pocket calculator they already know about. They have already used. An extension of the mobile phone that they are already able to use as well. Okay? So, and for those who think that giving the instrument is going to make the class shine, at experience, we already have, at ENSICO, we already have experience. There is the good habit that you started of having a weekly meeting, and the reports of these weekly meetings are very interesting. Sometimes the students simply don't care about using the computer. They enjoy far more to guess the answers that the computer is going to give, and who's going to So it's quite interesting to see that they sometimes feel uninterested by using the physical computer, which is a surprise. We thought, this would be the spot that is going to change things. But eventually, and this is the last stage, eventually they become aware that there's a factor of scale. In these reports, in these weekly meetings, I remember one of the master teachers saying, the students said, I don't need a computer for that, I can do it by hand. So you have to show them the scale factor. You can sum 10 numbers, but 1 million, it takes a while, and you're going to error. Okay, so that's where the marvel things happens. The magic thing happens when you see the machine doing what you would do in a wrong way, fast, and completing the job. Why a functional language? It's because knowledge cannot be built, new knowledge is always built on top of already known knowledge. And the things that we have, they're studying in their courses, the technical ones, of the natural science ones, they are using a language, which is that compressed language called mathematics, which doesn't have procedures. It doesn't have, it's not imperative. It's a language which is not imperative. Of course, so the closest to the language they see in the maths book is a functional language. The other final thing that I'd like to say is that people think, not usually think that because they use computers, they are the clever ones. They think that this world of computing is touchless, is perfect. Is the opposite. Is a completely mess. We don't have a programming language, neither 2 or 3. We have thousands of programming languages. Many of them with baroque syntaxes, which nobody understands why they started that way. So we have to be very careful to choose languages that are minimal. So languages where the students can express their thoughts with a minimal effort and without this very horrible thing, which is, why do we have to write this in this way? Well, the language is like that. So the students are forced to accept baroque things, strange things, because the software designers who designed the language invented that in that way. So that's why we go for a minimal thing. Well, after these 3 first parts, the door is open for the math. So I believe the secondary stage, we are not there, is open the door to the math. And then you are going to face different languages, different paradigms, but this start has been done very carefully, protecting them from anarchy, if you want. Okay.
Okay, thank you. And the last one to you, Ademar. So based on your experiences with the junior university or Universidade Junior, in which university level students are engaged to teach pre-university students, do you think graduated software engineers and computer scientists could be willing to teach computer science to K-12 students? And could this be done through a cooperation between universities and schools?
Mm-hmm. So I think everybody is aware of what Universidade Júnior has been doing. So to be short, I think we are running out of time. So the answer is yes, bold yes, to the first question. Why? Because they are doing it already. I was trying to look for Marina. Okay. Well, she was here.
Oh, Marina, she's there. She's there.
Okay. And so there are some our former students already doing that. And why? Because, of course, not all. Why? Because they are passionate about the topic and they like to see the eyes of the kids and the other, so the younger students to know what is this and how easy it is to start. It's not easy to be a professional, probably, because of the complexity of the things we are talking about. But they are so excited to see the eyes of the kids, and every day we have new kids. So I can tell that for many years I cannot count because I lost count before pandemic. But I think it was like 5 years of Universidade Júnior. Every month we had 600 students of 12, 30 years old that some of them, they live 30 kilometers from here. They never had used a computer before, okay? That was amazing for some of us. And in order to make them even more excited, because programming leads to a result that is displayed in a monitor, so it's really abstract, we started teaching them also with blinking LEDs. So when the LED starts blinking, they were so excited. So much more excited, 1,000 times more excited than blinking a pixel, you see? So because it's tangible.
Right.
So the answer is definitely a yes. The question is how to do it and exactly what to teach. We played different formats. We can talk offline during the break. But for those that are in break, we are not streaming the break, sorry. But we explored many different ways. We end up being happy with those activities with one day, only to make, to teach students, to make them aware of this area. So it's like to be eclectic. Everybody should have access to this. And some of those changed their lives, those 6 hours, okay? And that is touching a lot. Right. Some of them are our students right now, and they never thought about that. And the parents came to us and say, Yeah, this was so incredible. She didn't want, this case it was a she. Actually, I think she was reported in the magazine as well. And the mother forced the student to come here because the mother thought she would like, but she was not sure, the student. And suddenly, so there are many stories about this. So yes, how, what? I think that's what we should at ENSICO look for, because it's not easy. And there's another, could this be done? Something like that?
Yeah,
You said?
the cooperation between
Yeah.
universities and
So
schools.
here I have even stronger. So should.
Yeah.
So I think this should involve all people in the country. So the knowledge partners, like say universities, the educational system, of course.
Yeah, sure.
So, and our students could be co-teaching. So I also believe a lot on co-teaching. Otherwise can be, you know, it's not so easy. And of course the industry should be involved as well, because they are the takers, or they demand, they have the requirements for those students and so on. So yeah, I have many stories I can share during the break, sorry, for those not attending the streaming.
Well, thank you, Ademar, and thank you, Simons, for being with us. Thank you, Tim. Good night for you. Okay, but thank you all, and thank you, José Nuno. Thank you, Ademar. Thank you for being here with us. And now I close this panel.